Okay, so chapter 4 addresses the question of method in sociology. And obviously, method is what distinguishes everyday opinion or common sense from what we might think of as science. And obviously, as social scientists, we have opinions, but the question is, can we justify those opinions? And obviously, that brings us to the question of method. Simply, we might say that method is the sum of 5 things, and I'll talk a little bit about those. So, asking a question, designing a method, picking the method, actually collecting the data, and analyzing the data. So 5 things. First of all, identifying a question. Okay, that's 3 parts maybe. So what is the problem? A question of what? Why is it important? The question of why. How is it possible? The question of how. So what, why, and how. Is it relevant? Is it feasible, ethical, concise? Can you actually answer it? These are the questions you have to ask yourself. So the best way to ask yourself, what question should I ask, is to look at the previous literature. And when you're reading the work that other people have done, you probably want to ask yourself 6 simple questions. What did they say? When did they say it? Where did they say it about? How did they actually collect the data? Who were they actually talking to or researching? And why did they do the things they did? And basically, when you can figure out what people are agreeing with and what they're disagreeing with, you can figure out what it is that you need to ask yourself. Okay, so that then takes us on to the question of design. And in simple terms, you might be asking, okay, am I trying to explore or am I trying to test? So is this something that you don't know much about and therefore you're going to have to explore it in more detail? Or is it something that you know enough about to say, okay, I have a question that I can actually test? And sometimes we talk about exploration as induction and testing as deduction. And those are your primary kind of starters. And then when you get into design in more detail, you can ask yourself, well, am I interested in change over time, longitudinal research, differences between places, comparative research, the focus on the details of a particular location, cross-sectional research, and the micro detail of a particular location or individual or small group, and that would be case study research. So those would be your primary forms of design. The question then is, okay, what would be the method of actually conducting your research? And basically, would you look, observing people's actions, ask them questions, actually talk to people, or would you actually go to archives and look at what's already been collected? So those are your kind of primary methods. And then within that, your more detailed methods of experiments, when you're testing and looking, ethnography, when you're exploring and looking. You could look at questionnaires when you're basically testing and asking, or interviews when you're exploring and asking. And finally, with archives, you might look at previous studies that have been done, so detailed prior data collected, or you're looking at more informal diaries, records, photo albums, Facebook pages, things that have been archived, but not in a formal and structured way. One thing to add on that sort of shift into collection, if you've picked your method, would be sampling. And obviously, you want to think about, okay, can I get a sample that's representative of the population? If I can't do that by the classic random sampling method, what are the alternatives? And obviously, there are a range of those. Okay, and that then brings us to analysis. So you've collected data, and you may have asked people questions in getting verbal responses, or you may have collected data that generated numerical responses, and basically you need to analyze that. So if you are collecting textual data, the first thing you'll want to do is code it. So identify the recurrent elements of text within your data. Secondly, you'll want to carry out some kind of qualitative content analysis, looking for patterns. So how often do particular textual terms recur, and how do they associate? Do certain terms associate with others? Are others never associated with others? And finally, beyond content analysis, you look at discourse analysis. So not looking for the patterns, but actually trying to identify what those patterns mean, what they represent, and how they're constructed. Okay, similarly then, those levels of analysis, if you were collecting quantitative data, you'd want to start with simply coding the data, levels of measurement. Secondary, looking for tables, graphs that could represent the distribution and the kind of central tendencies within that numerical data. And finally, forms of bivariate and multivariate analysis, where you look at how data fits into patterns of association, regression, and significance. So basically, that's how you analyze and conclude your method